Security can't solve crucial problems when they have to wade through thousands of alerts a day. With ServiceNow, you can easily prioritize and respond to your most crucial business threats. That way, you can go from overwhelmed to under control. ServiceNow brings security, risk, and IT together on one platform. Learn more at securityweekly.com/ServiceNow. When it comes to modernizing identity, Active Directory just makes everything harder. From managing access for contractors and departing employees to securing cloud apps and on-prem systems, your company deserves better. Choose Okta, the modern identity platform that securely connects anyone that touches your organization to any technology they want to use. Okta reduces AD vulnerabilities, secures not only employees but contractors and customers, simplifies domain consolidation, and reduces your attack surface. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/Okta. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Quick announcement before we get started. February 13th will be our next webcast with Sri Sundaralingam. That's right. He will be here. He's the Vice President and of Product Solutions and Marketing at ExtraHop. We're going to talk about cloud-native network detection and response. Actually getting some packet captures from the cloud, which seems to be an elusive thing, I think, sometimes, and certainly for many people. But certainly it's an important part of, well, at least my enchanting quadrants as I talk about them. You can go to securityweekly.com, select the webcast drop-down menu, and register. Matt is still on the lines remotely, and here in studio are our guests from Onapsis. Alex Horan is the product manager, who we've got a long history to get. We've lots of shenanigans. We could have like a whole shenanigans episode, I think, with Alex. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
JP Perez is the CTO for Onapsis. Welcome, JP.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you both in studio. It's nice to talk about SAP and Oracle too, right? You guys are still doing Oracle stuff as well. We haven't talked about that. There's been some vulnerabilities recently, but I think, getting us caught up on some of the things that might be happening and emerging in the SAP space. As Matt, I don't think we've covered too many articles, certainly not this year. So,
no, not a lot. No, not many at all.
So what's been going on in the SAP world?
Yeah, I could take a brief stab, and then JP, as always, will give a more intelligent answer. But one thing we've seen that's been interesting, going on 2 weeks now, is someone published a hacker toolkit for SAP. It's called RFC Pwn PWN. It just targets specific high-privileged access. So it's really a post-exploitation type of toolkit. Once you have access to an SAP system, how to really elevate those privileges and take advantage of it. What's interesting for us is it just shows that there is focus coming on SAP systems. When things become kind of, for want of a better word, mainstream, and people are just publishing toolkits versus keeping them for themselves, it means they think that this is out there, for me at least, in the common domain, that everyone should be doing this from a security testing point of view. So that for me was a trigger that, all right, this is not a lot of people think of SAP as niche, back office, run somewhere quietly, no one ever sees it, as something that everyday people are starting to poke at and figure out, how can this break? How can I take this to my use this rather to my advantage?
Do you partner, if I remember correctly, you partner with someone to monitor kind of like the dark web and the underground for what's being traded and said about exploiting SAP and Oracle systems, right?
Yeah. We partially do that through our research team, but we partner with threat intelligence providers that basically do that day in, day out, right? And they have their closed sources teams, and they have their different individuals that can target cyber criminal forums. They speak different languages. So doing threat intel is really, really complex, right? Doing it right. So
because there's a lot of rings. Right? I kind of think of them almost like rings in an operating system, right? Yeah. And, the most elite are trading that stuff, and it's really hard to get telemetry on what they might be doing, right? But now the fact that a toolkit has come, where was the toolkit posted? Can you say where it was posted?
Yeah, it was on GitHub.
Yeah.
So and we saw a lot of different hacking sites starting to pick that up all over the world, right? Immediately, on day 1 and day 2, all over the US, Europe, China, Russia, in different hacking sites, really showing that capability.
And there's individuals out there that are damn it, now there's a spotlight on all this stuff. Like I was flying under the radar before. Now that someone leaked this tool and someone's mad.
Exactly, people are paying attention.
And that definitely changes the probability, right? Because it's, hey, no, it's no longer a really complex application that no one knows how to deal with. Now you have open source libraries, you have open source exploit toolkits, you have repos in GitHub with different type of exploits, like we had last year 10K, the code name 10K Blaze, which was really important on the SAP sphere, security sphere, because of the sheer number of exposed systems that are out there. So it's getting more and more attention as well from the threat actors. So now building entire toolkits around it.
I know there's people out there running SAP that are probably going to be upset with what I'm about to say, but I think it's a good thing, right? Based on the history and track record in security of this happening, right? Recently I was reading the book about the CDC. Of course, they're one of their bigger claims to fame, and why you may know them is Back Orifice and Back Orifice 2K. That put a lot of pressure on Microsoft, and Microsoft customers put pressure on Microsoft to improve security. And I think where it culminated was with that very famous Bill Gates email to the company that said, if you're working on something and you see a security problem, you have to stop what you're doing and address the security. And that's still embedded in Microsoft's culture today. Do you foresee similar things happening in the SAP and Oracles of the world as these tools become more popular? That similar kind of shift happening? We can hope, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a positive trend from the vendors into really securing more and more and providing more out-of-the-box security, more secure defaults. It's a complex technology, right? These are complex processes. You cannot just shift things around from one day to the other, because then suddenly a lot of things stop working. We have a lot of history in organizations running very old versions all the way to the newest versions with all the innovation, but still there is a lot of inertia to really be able to address security. But yes, the trend is definitely positive, and as you mentioned, it definitely helps. These type of things are negative in the way that now more threat actors, it's easier to actually do bad things with these kind of things, but also on the flip side, it raises awareness and creates this opportunity for organizations really, hey, we haven't been doing a lot of security in the past, but you know what? Things have changed. So we really need to start doing more of this.
Right. Well, and it's also interesting, too, that, the attackers have to work, I think, a lot harder to gain access to Windows systems. It's almost a natural progression for them to shift off to other applications and or attack vectors, right? They're like, ooh, SAP. A lot of people have that too, right? Maybe we should go after that, because not as much attention is being paid to security, whereas Microsoft, I think, has done a really good job in the past 20 years of improving security.
I'll definitely agree.
The other thing,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I was going to say, one of the, I think, big challenges in this space, right, is you're not usually on the latest version of these ERP systems, right? I mean, these are major systems in an organization. They take time to upgrade. And so I'm curious about, when we think about attacks here, are you seeing more attacks at older versions because newer versions have implemented certain security controls and therefore are better? Kind of what does that look like? Because my guess is not everybody's on the latest version. There's a lot of legacy versions of these types of platforms sitting out there.
Yeah, I'll go first. But absolutely, you're right. And there's two elements to it. For those not too familiar with SAP, the way I think of it is, like when I think about Microsoft and others, it's kind of somewhat prepackaged. Like if you're running Exchange, it just does Exchange, and you kind of run it somewhat out of the box. SAP for me is a platform that you build custom applications that run on top of. And if they rely on a certain functionality underneath, you can't just simply patch that functionality and turn something off, because you're going to break everything that goes above it. So for exactly that reason, a lot of people are behind, because they need time to evaluate the patches and the changes and how they'll affect their the custom code and the customizations that they've invested like millions of dollars into putting into these systems. So we see you have everything. We do have some people we work with who are on the latest version, and that's their policy, and others who we only make a change once a year. And so they're kind of that far behind, and then
we were talking about that earlier
Yeah.
about, someone made a production change that broke something, 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Therefore,
So never again.
there's a committee, there's forms to fill out, tickets, and that takes months
Yeah.
or can culminate into every year we make
Yeah.
a change.
We're seeing one change that's taking place. There was a big push to go to the cloud, and people are using that as a chance to say, okay, well, let's start again. Let's go to the
Right.
cloud. Let's go to these offerings and use that as a chance
But that's
to
still,
replace.
that's a ton of work.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to sit here like as pundits
Yeah.
and say, we should all just move to the cloud. It'll solve all your problems. I see that on much smaller scales
Yeah.
than SAP.
Yeah,
I was
it's
looking at one of my
multi-year
servers. I'm
projects.
like, I want to migrate that. I'm like, but I'm on an older version of the app. I'm on an older version of the app server. I'm on an older version of the database. I can go build all of that new infrastructure in the cloud. That's the easy part. The hard part is, how do I get from point A to point B now, right?
Yeah.
Now I have to basically upgrade it in the legacy architecture is
Exactly.
one way, right? Get it to a point and then start migrating it over to the
Yeah.
cloud. And this is just like a really small
So imagine
application,
a
but you
business
can
critical
imagine
application that can't be down.
Right.
How do you migrate that to the cloud?
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, so that's
Right.
the
I mean,
challenge
these
our
systems
customers
are
facing.
running. They're running production lines. They're running warehouses. I mean, these are running the day-to-day operations of a business. You can't just pick it up one day and
Yep.
throw it in the cloud and say you're done.
Yeah.
Another important component of that is the data and processes that are supported by these applications are heavily regulated. Like think about like pharma, other there are a ton of industries that they have such a strong change management process. They need to document and test significantly everything that goes into production. So that introduces a lot of delays and challenges to be up in the latest version. And
we were just talking about that, the compliance as it is in a more traditional system. When you start moving that to the cloud, how do you still maintain that? We just had that discussion in the previous segment.
Yeah, and especially the data in transit, who has access to it. It's not the people who truly need that data, and not the ones moving it. So now you're introducing someone else with access to data. How much access do they have? Do they need to have to move it? Who does the testing? Like, there's so many layers
Right.
to it.
How do you get
Yep.
test data?
Exactly.
I was actually talking about, I was reading the Unicorn Project, and they addressed some of these issues, right? They kind of bring it to life in the story. We saw some of that in the Phoenix Project too. And you tend to listen to these stories, and you're like, no, it can't be that bad. Like, Gene's exaggerating, right? But then you folks come on and, and basically kind of regurgitating some of the same things that exist in people's environments. So it's very much a reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, businesses are in the business of being a business, right? So we've seen it all. Like, security now, I think, is moving a bit more to the forefront, but it can't stop a business from doing what they need to do to be profitable and successful. So we have to, or rather, the people we work with have to work within constraints. Like, they can't stop the business from doing what they need to do. They need to make the data available to whoever needs it, as defined often by the regulation and others.
Right.
And then now you introduce, these 2, 3, 4 year projects of, okay, let's move this application to the cloud and maybe consolidate what was different applications running in different geo units to one in the cloud without disrupting the business. I mean, that's a huge, I'm glad I just get to advise and not actually have to do it.
And to that point, I think that's the beauty and a lot of the benefits of the technology that we provide, which actually helps you really stay compliant. Through the acquisition of Virtual Forge last year, finalized mid last year, we integrated a lot of different components that basically you get an overview on where you are at in terms of the compliance levels. You set your goals, your objectives, your maturity, your plans, but also you put controls in terms of, hey, I don't want this to get worse. So everything I do is moving forward going to be improving my compliance posture. So compliance has been a big driver for us.
Yeah, you have to know where you're at in order to improve, right? And know if it's slipping, right? And that's what the solution provides, is that visibility and basically reporting on, here's how I'm doing.
Exactly.
Right? I don't want to say vulnerability scanner because it's not that. That's the wrong term to describe it, right?
Yeah, it's really just kind of assessing and monitoring the risk of business critical applications. So one of those is vulnerability scanning, at a raw level is the vulnerabilities. But with SAP, a lot of it is around access, like who has access to data, especially from a compliance point of view. And the second is this custom code, and we're talking tens of millions of lines of custom code. Is all about helping people get access to data, manipulate data. So does that have problems in it that will allow kind of, the assumption, we've all seen it. The assumption is someone will only use this program to read that data. But if they change the query, suddenly they're reading all the data.
Right.
Catching things like that, and then monitoring as things are being used, what's going on. Because if you have, whatever, let's pick a number, 10 million lines of code, and you've got 1,000 critical vulnerabilities, you're not going to fix them tomorrow. And every business makes the decision between, I have developers who could develop the new application the business needs, or spend 6 months fixing the problems I've just found, and delivering kind of no value to the business from that point of view. So let's just monitor for, is someone doing something with that, and stop creating more problems in the future.
Yeah, I think that's often glossed over in security too. I think we always like to think about that people should just go fix stuff, right?
And fixing is free.
Yeah, but we see this even with our own internal applications, right? Are you going to spend time fixing and writing stuff in your existing platform when you're going to rewrite it maybe for the cloud, right? And it's going to be a new architecture, and that's going to inherently fix a lot of these issues. So, am I going to write the application once or twice, right? And that original rewrite of it is just going to get thrown away. Yeah. It's not even code that'll be in production. So you need something to hold you over,
exactly,
right? In the meantime. And so that, from what I remember from the platform, it provides that, right?
Yeah, so the monitoring will help.
Monitoring and virtual patching too. There's some protection.
There's an element of that, but I think that really for the custom code as well is kind of monitoring the transactions that the people are running, trying to monitor the data they're accessing. And then through Elements, we have IDE plugins for developers. Just all right, let's kind of tell them if they're coding the next thing, if they're adding that vulnerability again. Let's kind of warn them as they do it, so we can fix it. Shift left, fix it as close to the developer. Literally, when they code it, just tell them, hey, that thing you just coded it doesn't have any control. SQL injection could happen, as an example.
Right.
So you kind of stop the bleeding. Let's not have more vulnerabilities. Let's kind of stop it here.
So you kind of take 4 or 5 different security markets, right? Because you talked about, code, right? You talk about vulnerabilities, configuration components, even monitoring. I mean, you're looking at 4 or 5 different kind of what would be traditional security markets, but really focused around SAP and Oracle and their functionality to kind of provide a more holistic solution.
Absolutely, yeah. Conceptually, we have brought a lot of the concepts of different security industries into a platform focused on business applications with the context of business applications, right? Integrated into SAP, very integrated into Oracle and beyond as well. So we see a lot of the same problems in other areas, but in SAP and Oracle, they have the same problem, but with different levels of complexity. That's what we are addressing. And
so it's not a language specific thing, it's more of a platform. So they may be coding in languages that we code in outside of business critical applications, but the implementation inside is different. There's nuances in there, in other words, that you can pick up on. Because I imagine they're coding in Java and a lot of different languages. Right? What I understand is the application is so large, there's a lot of both technologies and languages in there, right? So you see Java, PHP, right?
JavaScript, Java, ABAP, within HANA, another like SQL scripts, and there are different languages for different components depending on where you build the application. But it's a little bit of everything.
I want to go back to some of the exploits and vulnerabilities. What has surfaced recently? I saw some news recently, and admittedly I kind of glossed over it. So which I'm sure is one of the... It's a problem we've talked about, right? Is you tend to gloss over it because people have those legacy systems and they're not upgrading. So, am I going to go look at the latest Microsoft Windows one, or am I going to look at the SAP one, right?
So we had the Oracle CPU very recently with a lot of, a record-breaking number of patches. Some of those actually fixing vulnerabilities that affected ERP applications like e-business suite, very critical, like web, enable full compromise. So if you're an ABS customer, go and check on your patches. You really need to be up to date, because not only of the criticality of the vulnerabilities, but also those vulnerabilities are actively being exploited. We have seen CPU after CPU. We have the serialization, injection vulnerabilities, everything like HTTP enabled, boom, immediately starts being integrated into like different type of malware or even like actively exploited through the web. So
is that before or after the patch comes out, or both?
it's a mix.
It varies, right?
It's very commonly after the patch is available.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have seen Oracle rushing with a patch because another vulnerability is being exploited in the wild.
Right.
But the most common scenario is after the patch. And
Which is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
We've known for a long time that once we release the patch, like all bets are off, right?
Yeah.
That's why like you need to have the right process to actually consume that and make sure, especially if you have something that is internet facing, it's out there.
Do you see folks, you mentioned before there are some organizations that are doing a really great job of keeping up on patches. Are they using a DevOps style approach in a CI/CD pipeline? I imagine it's going to be very different from a lot of other environments, right? But do you see them adopting those kind of approaches in order to get to that state where they can patch more quickly?
Yeah, exactly. So with an SAP deployment specifically, you're required to have a development system, a staging system or testing and production, which all should in theory mirror. And what we're seeing in those people who are patched within 30 days is just both good processes and then confidence that if there is a problem, we have a process to react to it and pull something back.
Pull it back, yeah.
So that's the biggest pieces for those organizations who either have a very slow kind of patching cycle or really have none at all. It's because they try and treat them special. Like we need a special process or they're out of band and therefore there's no bandwidth. And what these companies have done who can do it so quickly is it's just, they come out, we know they come out second Tuesday of the month. Like they go into this system first and they just follow this process and they spread out to lower tier, kind of less critical systems. And and some of them are truly being tested by users. They don't tell the user, they just update the system and check the help desk to see how many issues they have.
It's a rollout style approach, right? Like a lot of us recommend enterprises when they roll out a Microsoft Windows patch and they've got 50,000 desktops, don't roll it out to every single one, right? Like do a section, see how it goes, but they're using that style of approach.
Exactly.
Which I think, there's really no other options at that point, right? When you've got infrastructure that large.
Because with a security patch, I was talking to one of the key guys who managed this, and I asked him about testing. He said, well, with a security patch, what do you really test? Like, unless you have the exploit, you're not testing, is it not exploitable? It's really just, does the system still do what it should?
Right,
like
right. You're regression testing with every release, basically.
And they have regressions for all their all their critical systems anyway, so they just run it through that standard testing, and then, as we said, they roll it out. The most critical systems are closer to the 30-day mark, but by then they're extremely confident that there will be no disruption.
Right. How often does a security patch disrupt the application? Is that because there's so much customizations? Like basically, like everyone has that. It's not just Oracle or SAP can test it and say, yeah, it's good. Everyone's heavily customized their environments, right? So it depends.
That really depends on the maturity level of the company, how well you use the standard that is provided by the vendor, right? If you use things that are not documented or not really released.
I always code to the standard. Straight lace code right to the standard.
No question about it.
No one ever deviates from that, right?
But that's key, because otherwise, if you start using things that are not really like ideal to be used, then things get really messy, and a patch could change anything, right? Like could disable entire functionality in a function module, in a report, in any class. So it depends on the maturity level of the teams that are developing that code. But we see every now and then like disruption by some of these patches, but it's not as common, fortunately, as in the old days.
When we talk about moving these applications to the cloud, are there a popular cloud vendor that they're moving towards? Is it going to SAP's own cloud, or are they using one of the three like major providers, or a mixture?
I'm seeing it spread. I don't know if you're seeing different, but some going to SAP's own kind of cloud, which is really a little bit closer to SaaS, because SAP
like a hosted service,
exactly. But then across the kind of quote unquote the big three, and there's some dedicated SAP hosting providers. We're not seeing one sticking out as everyone is going to them.
Well, because if everyone's customized, everyone has different requirements, so
exactly.
it's going to be
and
be
really
spread out.
some of they're already in at least one cloud with some other application.
Correct.
So part of it is that is our cloud provider, and
Right.
I'm seeing others lesser so, but who are saying no, we're deliberately going to at least 2 cloud providers because we want redundancy across the different cloud, and some are saying my development systems, my testing systems, they'll all be in the cloud, but my production SAP, that's not leaving my premises. Like,
that's
so they're taking
interesting.
advantage of the cloud for being able to bring systems up and down for testing and
Yeah,
development,
yeah.
but because of the data, because of the regulations around managing that data, they feel much more confident having it on-prem and having that kind of management and ownership of it.
Yeah, and in the end, majority of organizations, at least on the large enterprise sector, have true hybrid environments where they have on-premise SAP and ERP applications. They have a bunch of systems on either Azure, Amazon, GCP, HANA Enterprise Cloud, you name it, right? Like the infrastructure as a service component, and some SaaS solutions as well. All of them integrated. So they truly are, most of them truly are like really in a hybrid environment when it comes to business applications.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and those deployment models are going to be very different, right? I mean, if you're using SAP SaaS or Oracle SaaS, for example, there's probably a lot of things they're doing under the platform to keep it maintained versus running infrastructure as a service in one of the cloud providers. You're still responsible for all those updates and patches anyways. So you're right back into maybe some of the challenges you have with older versions and upgrading and having those mature processes. So, those could look very different depending on which way you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you may gain some savings, but the responsibility is yours. So therefore, the management, like the basis personnel, the administrators, you're not giving up all of those people.
Yeah, and regardless of the cloud service model, regardless of the type of deployment you have, it's still always the organization's responsibility around the data. So you need to do the due diligence. You need to get comfortable with all the providers, because if there's a breach, it's your head in the line, right? So cloud is not gonna be the magical solution to save you out of that responsibility.
No, I can just imagine the scope of the project to move components of these applications into the cloud.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to take very small applications and learn how to deploy into the cloud, and I've got a lot of headaches and gray hairs from it. I mean, but we're talking about lots of different systems, lots of different technologies that all need to talk to each other, and lots of teams that need to communicate.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's probably one of the limiting factors in this whole process too. Is I think oftentimes we get caught up in our own bubble, like, oh, I'm writing software for myself or sharing it with my friends on GitHub. But when reading the books I've been reading lately, take me back to a large software shop and how there's all different teams for all just different portions of the application and then different functions within those teams, and just being able to get things done can be extremely difficult. Let alone, let's do our regular jobs and, oh, by the way, figure out a cloud deployment as well. Are there firms that are specifically helping folks with that migration? I'm sure there must be, right?
Yeah, all the SIs, they are building entire business units around cloud migration, and it's not only the migration itself, but also it's the opportunity for organizations to leverage the latest technology. So it comes with the advantage of, okay, not only you're adopting a completely new cloud service model and deployment model, you are also leveraging in-memory user experience, UI, like benefits around performance, analytics, a lot of different things that come with the latest versions of whatever you're deploying, right?
Right. And I know we like to say that APIs will save everyone, right? But I think, I don't know if it's a dirty little secret, but I think what happens, especially in these environments, is that you end up with lots of different APIs. No one can figure out how to authenticate to them, and then they're constantly changing. So one piece of the application talks to an API and another piece of the application. Well, that piece changed. No one updated the documentation, right, or the way to authenticate. And then you've got security issues that are stemming from the API. So I think sometimes as security professionals, when I think about this architecture, I'm like, well, if you segment it out and they're talking to each other over APIs, that can solve a lot of not just security problems, but other issues as well. But then that comes down to process, I think, really, right? and I'm sure your tool also is looking at.
Yeah.
I'm sure the APIs are different.
Yeah.
Well, some of them are the same as the ones we're interfacing with as well. But the problems that stem from that in a large environment, I think, are pretty drastic.
Exactly.
People may not realize.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to there's so many moving parts. And trying to, like you said, talk about upgrade and change. So someone changes an API, maybe there's an additional bit of data that's being shared, and now suddenly you're not compliant with something you should be. Or,
right.
And that's really hard for people to track and just be aware of the changes. The second piece you mentioned, which I've worked in obviously startups and smaller companies, and even now we're 300, but we're still reasonably sized. But what I've seen in the very large organizations is kind of you talk about people writing components within an application who are really siloed from each other. And so they might add something just thinking it'll be helpful, not realizing that it conflicts with what someone else is doing or another team is doing.
Right.
And suddenly you have this bit in there that no one really knows is there. And then obviously someone like the people who watch your podcast come along and figure out, if you call it this way, it'll tell you the username or it'll tell you this other piece of information, and suddenly you're in real trouble. Right. Yeah.
It gave me the great visual, and I've witnessed this, right? You're in the middle of maybe of a big release of a large software project, and everyone's, security scurrying around, ops is scurrying around, the data managers are scurrying around, but then you walk in by the cubicles of people that are developers, on, like you said, one component, and they're happily working 9 to 5. Everyone else is working through the weekends and late nights. They're happily working their 9 to 5 going, I push my code out. I'm working on my feature, my code, and I'm happily, coding away.
Yeah.
I had forgotten that because I hadn't worked for a large software company in so long.
Yeah.
I'm like,
they check in their code and
that's
off
it.
They go.
Yep. They're in their hoodie. Hacking away.
Yeah.
Matt, more questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So what RSA is right around the corner.
Yep.
You got big plans, announcements. What's coming up next in Onapsis world?
Yeah, so maybe what's coming today. So we just announced appointing vice chair of the board for Dave DeWalt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really very, very recent. That definitely provides a lot of validation. He was very excited of and believes on the problem that we are solving and really the solution that we are providing. That's on the recent side. Moving forward, RSA, the technology, we continue to grow. Maybe you want to talk about the platform and the integration and the
Yeah, I mean, the RSA is going to be a lot of fun. So one thing we've been working on is to summarize kind of where Onapsis was until kind of middle of last year was we focused all of our effort on the underlying technology. And the polite way of explaining that would be you could see that when you looked at our UI. Our UI was functional, I think would be a friendly way to describe it. It gave you all the data, but not necessarily the facts and the information that you needed. So that's...
Hey, Alex. Ooh. Paul has that same problem.
Same problem. You're not alone. You're not alone.
Geniuses do.
But I think, I was talking with our developer about this morning. Actually, I think it's a good timing wise, right? Because I think last year even there's just been explosion of different technologies for the UI, right? And I think today we've got much better options. It's kind of whittled its way down, basically to React. It's what people seem to, when I talk to folks, I mean, that's what they've been settling on. And when I look at that, now I understand why. Performance, security, scalability, the whole thing. I'm like, it's pretty solid. I know there's also another.
That's why we waited to do it.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I'm not saying that's reducing the technology, but there's other great technologies that have emerged in the UI space. But I think it's a good time if you're sitting there going, this is the time we want to work on our usability. Now, there's also, I found, a very big learning curve when you get to some of these new technologies as well. But I think totally worth it in what I've researched. So good time.
So we'll be able to show some of that at RSA, which for me I'm really excited. The product has always been the technology has always been fantastic, and just the UI didn't do it justice. It told you the latest information.
So wait, is it React? Now I'm curious.
I'm almost certain it is. I need to double check. That's how removed I am sometimes. But it's showing people now it really just helps understand and show improvements and changes over time. And that's a big thing we're getting a lot of requests for is, we can tell you right now you have X number of issues and this many kind of bad activities going on, etc. But the inevitable question we get is, well, is that better or worse than it was? Like,
Right.
am I improving? Am I getting worse? And just people had to take our data out and manipulate it to get that answer.
Spreadsheets, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People love that. And so now it'll just tally right there, like, whatever. You have this many incidents that took place. That is, this much more or less percentage-wise than it was a quarter ago, a month ago, a year ago, like whatever framework of time you want. So people can really see, because that's, people invest in our product, and what they want to show is, I made this investment, and I've improved by this much.
Right,
To justify. That's at the end of the day, that's someone who's signing the checks needs to understand. Well,
it makes them feel good too. I mean, because this is a very frustrating process in this particular environment, especially, right? So showing even small wins over time gives the team confidence, quite frankly.
Yeah, and you can say, all right, we're closer to whatever the longer the 5-year goal is. Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to seeing you folks out at RSA. Thank you very much for coming in studio.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And with that, we'll take a short break and come back to round out the show with our last interview. Stay tuned.